The heat had arrived with the dawn, not as a gentle warmth but as a brutal, unforgiving presence that leached the very life out of the world. By mid-morning, the sky above me was a washed-out, bone-white haze, dry and colorless. The sun felt like a judgment, a slow, silent punishment. Irritable gusts of wind stirred the relentless dust, stinging my raw skin and scratching at my eyes. Nothing green had grown here for months. The land was a vast, forgotten canvas of death, and Ikora was a smear of ink at its edge. Just beyond the final broken-down shacks that marked the town's tired boundary, a place of last resorts and forgotten souls, lay the unforgiving stretch of flat land. Cracked fence lines and empty troughs were the only tombstones this desert offered, and there nestled in that desolate cradle was a camp that barely deserved the name. A half-collapsed canvas tent, its fabric sagging and filthy with one corner torn free and flapping like a desperate signal of surrender. Inside I lay still. My body had been in a constant low-grade rebellion since sunrise, a symphony of cramps and a hollow ache that gnawed at my stomach. Hunger was a sharp-toothed animal in my gut, gnawing through the last of my strength. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. The small sack of oats my mother had left was a final cruel joke. The twine knot pulled impossibly tight, a final deliberate obstacle. My fingers, thin and weak, couldn't work it loose. I'd managed a few sips from the water jug the night before, a precious, life-giving act that felt like a memory from another life. Now the jug lay tipped over in the dirt, half buried, and empty, the last drops having long since evaporated. The flies circled, a maddening, persistent presence, landing on my jawline, beaded with sweat. My long brown hair, once a small source of pride, was now a tangled mess, matted across my cheeks and braided with the relentless dust. My skin, pale and translucent, bore the raw imprint of sunburn, a map of my suffering etched into my flesh. My legs. Since birth they had been a foreign country, a silent and uncooperative weight. They were a secret I had learned to drag behind me, to hide, to pull forward in the shadows where no one could see. My parents had been my teachers, ensuring I knew without a word ever needing to be spoken that this condition was a shame, a curse to be born in silence. My father had died 3 winters ago, a quiet end to a hard life. With him went the last vestiges of a pretense of care. By the time spring came again, my mother and brothers had run out of excuses for me. When I heard the familiar sounds of them packing the cart 2 mornings ago, the creak of the wooden wheels, the sharp snap of leather straps, I knew. There were no shouts. No tears, no final goodbye. They simply told me it was best for everyone. They left me with the unopened sack of oats, the almost full water jug, and the quiet, bone-deep understanding that I was a burden they would no longer carry. A new gust of wind shifted, and a layer of dry grit blew into my eyes. I blinked, the sharp pain a momentary distraction from the deeper, constant ache, but I didn't bother to wipe it away. My stomach clenched again, a tight, painful knot. My arms, trembling with the sheer effort of propping myself up against the splintered crate, threatened to give out. I could feel myself slipping, my mind blurring, my body surrendering, but I forced my eyes open again and again. I knew with a cold, terrifying certainty that if I let myself sleep for too long, I might not wake up at all. And a new feeling had taken root in me. It was a fierce, surprising will to live. I didn't want to die like this, not with my face in the dirt, a casualty of a world that had forgotten me. I wanted to live, to breathe, to feel the sun on my face without it feeling like a punishment. Footsteps passed, once a man's voice murmuring to a mule. I opened my mouth, a desperate, silent plea, but no sound came. The man didn't stop. Later, another came on horseback. A uniform, I thought, the star glinting in the sun, but the glare was too much. He paused. I felt his stare, a heavy, dispassionate weight, then the horse turned and I was alone again. I stopped expecting help after that, the last embers of hope dying in the harsh afternoon light. The pain had dulled, a deep, persistent throb beneath the surface of everything else. I was so tired. The sound of another horse came late in the day, its gait a slow, deliberate walk, not the hasty trot of someone passing through. Jedediah Thorne wasn't looking for anyone when he saw me. He was 34, a carpenter by trade, but not the kind who built houses. He built the things that held a world together. Yokes for oxen wheels, spokes for carts, and when sorrow demanded it, coffins. He was a craftsman of necessity, a quiet man who lived on the far edge of town alone. Folks who passed his shop saw him sanding, hammering, always lost in the methodical rhythm of his work. He never drank at the saloon and didn't attend the Sunday gatherings. Most said he was strange, but everyone agreed he was useful. He'd just returned from a 3-day haul into the hills, his packhorse loaded down with scrap iron, new oak planks, and a coil of used leather. He planned to get home before dark. No stops, no distractions. He saw the tent first, then the figure, small, unmoving. His boots slowed on instinct. His eyes didn't narrow or squint with suspicion. He just stared steady and analytical. The canvas was rotten, and I looked barely conscious. One of my arms twitched when the wind kicked up. He stopped walking. There was no crowd here, no sound from town this far out. Just the wind and the quiet that filled the space between heartbeats. He walked forward until he stood in front of me. His shadow fell across my face, a sudden blessed relief from the sun. I flinched, my whole body tensing. "You awake?" he asked, his voice deep and flat, not unkind. I didn't know who he was, but his voice was a sound I hadn't heard in days. A human sound, calm and steady. I wanted to speak, to beg for water, but my mouth was a desert, and I wasn't sure I could trust the quiet intensity in his stare. I just barely nodded. He knelt slowly, keeping his weight off his knees with the practiced ease of a man used to working close to the ground. Up close, he saw my condition clearly. My legs weren't broken, just wrong. My skin was not bruised, just dried out, and I was unnaturally still. My eyes, however, were clearer than he expected, filled with a defiant fire that ached with exhaustion. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He simply saw the truth laid out before him. My throat worked, but no sound came. He stood open to saddlebag, pulled out a small jar of pickled beans, and unscrewed the lid. He set it near me gently, then walked around the back of the tent. I panicked for a moment, my mind screaming that he'd left, but then I heard the sound of canvas being ripped free. He came back with 2 long fence rails, a handful of straps, and began tying them into a crude stretcher. It wasn't elegant, but his knots were solid, his motions precise. He wrapped one of the cleaner rags from his pack around the upper rail to cushion my head, and patted the middle with a folded cloth. Then he crouched again. "This will hurt a little," he said, his eyes meeting mine, a silent apology in their depths. When he lifted me, I let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. My spine screamed in protest, a fire of agony that shot through me. But his grip was careful, his arms steady, not jerky or rough. He laid me onto the stretcher, adjusted the cloth beneath me, and strapped me in. My breathing was fast, shallow, a small animal panting in fear. He tightened the straps, then paused to check my face. "You all right?" I nodded, tears of pain and exhaustion blurring my vision. He tied the stretcher to his pack horse, left my head slightly elevated, and began to walk. Slow, even steps, the dust rising around our feet in small rhythmic puffs. I lay still, too weak to speak, watching the sky change color as the sun began its slow descent behind the hills. The town, a collection of tired buildings and worn-out faces, didn't notice us. Jedediah's shop stood at the far edge of everything. A one-room structure with hand-built walls, a slanted tin roof, and a crooked door that groaned when it opened. The yard was a clutter of split timber, old wheel frames, and tools stuck in the dirt like strange metallic weeds. He carried me inside. The room smelled like cedar leather and burnt oil, a scent of honest work, and lived in space. A cot sat in one corner, low to the ground. A small stove, cold for now, stood near the back. His workbench was heavy and stained, covered in clamps, sandpaper, and blades. He laid me on the cot and adjusted the blanket that was already there. I winced as I shifted, but said nothing. My hands gripped the edge of the mattress, the thin fabric a lifeline. He brought over the jar of beans and sat on a crate beside me. I tried to reach for it, my fingers clumsy and weak, but failed. He took the jar, handed me the spoon, and stepped away, giving me space. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer comfort. He just let me eat. I took 2 bites before setting the jar down my stomach, turning at the sudden richness. But it was enough to keep me from slipping back into the darkness. Jedediah picked up a half-finished yolk from the workbench and returned to sanding. His back was to me. He didn't glance over, but I knew he was listening. He would hear the quiet sighs of my breath, the small movements, the way the cot creaked when I shifted. I studied him from my vantage point on the cot. His movements were slow and practiced, the motions of a man who found comfort in repetition and precision. I couldn't tell if he was angry, bored, or just intensely focused. When my cup tipped over that evening, he turned at once, crossed the room, picked it up, and wiped the spill without a word. His face remained a mask of quiet purpose. He set the cup back down and returned to his work. Later, he lit the lamp, its flame casting long dancing shadows, then checked the stove, but didn't light it as it was still too warm. Before going to bed, he brought over a second blanket, unfolded it, and laid it gently across my legs. I didn't speak, but my throat tightened, a lump of emotion I couldn't swallow. No one had done that for me in years, that simple act of care that wasn't a chore but an offering. Jedediah didn't sleep until late. He stayed at the bench long after the oil in the lamp began to flicker. The room was quiet but no longer cold. I lay still, my eyes open for a while longer. I didn't feel safe yet, not truly, but I wasn't afraid. And for the first time in days, my mind didn't rush toward the inevitable end. I closed my eyes. This time I chose to sleep. I woke before sunrise, a small, quiet moment of disorientation. The cot beneath me felt too, even the room too still. It smelled like wood and iron, a foreign scent, but not a threatening one. My fingers closed around the edge of the blanket, a small confirmation that I was not dreaming. The last thing I remembered clearly was the sound of sanding, then the warm, deliberate weight of the blanket being placed gently over my legs. Not thrown, not dropped, but placed. I turned my head. Jedediah was asleep across the room, slumped in a wooden chair beside his workbench, his arms crossed over his chest, chin tucked low. He hadn't bothered with the cot. His boots were still on. A lamp, now extinguished, sat beside a coil of twine and a chisel. Sawdust clung to his shirt sleeves. His chest rose and fell in the slow, heavy rhythm of a man too tired to dream. My body ached in places I had stopped paying attention to years ago. My shoulders hurt from how he had lifted me, my back throbbed, and my wrists burned where the stretcher straps had pressed into my skin. But it was different now. This was a new pain, a recovery pain, not the pain of being left. I looked around. The workshop was small but meticulously neat. Handcrafted shelves lined the walls, holding tools, jars of nails, wood glue, and folded cloth. There was a small stove near the corner, still cold. A narrow table with two mismatched chairs stood under the single window. The glass was fogged slightly from the morning chill. The place looked lived in, built for one, not two, and yet here I was. I didn't move much. My body wouldn't let me. But I shifted enough to reach the water tin from last night. My fingers closed around it. He had placed it close on purpose. I drank slowly, the cool water a balm to my parched throat. Jedediah stirred 20 minutes later. He didn't startle when he saw me awake. He just rubbed his face, stood with a grunt, and stretched his back until his shoulders popped. Then he walked to the stove and began his work without a word. I watched. He pulled a small sack of ground cornmeal from a crate, poured some into a bowl, added water, stirred it with his finger, and scooped it onto a hot skillet. After lighting the flame, the scent of toasting corn filled the room, a warm, comforting smell I hadn't realized I was starving for. Only then did he speak. "Fire bother you?" "No," I said quietly. My voice was raw and soft, like it hadn't been used in years. He nodded once and went back to cooking. I hadn't spoken more than a handful of words in the past 3 days. I hadn't needed to. Most folks never asked me anything worth answering. Jedediah cooked until the bread flattened and browned, making 2 small rounds. He tore one in half, placed both halves in a whole one on a wooden plate, and set it beside me with no ceremony. I looked at it for a long moment before lifting my eyes to him. "You live here?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Alone since I was 24. I wanted to ask more. Why 24? Where was his family? But I didn't. I nodded once and picked up the bread. It was rough but warm. I ate slowly. He didn't watch me eat. He returned to the workbench, picked up a thin leather strap, and began threading it through a half-finished stirrup. I finished the bread, my fingers sticky from the heat and cornmeal. "Why'd you take me?" I asked the question, a quiet challenge. Jedediah didn't look up. "You needed help. It's that simple." "It's not," I said. He kept working the leather strap, his focus. I watched him for another few seconds, then leaned back and let my head rest on the cot frame. The corner of the room where I lay was warmer now, sunlight creeping in through the window, touching the floor near my cot and lighting the edge of the blanket. "I'm not much use," I muttered. A lifetime of shame in those 4 words. He paused his threading, then resumed. "I don't need use," he said, the tone flat but not harsh. It was just final. No man had ever said that to me. My whole life had been defined by whether I could be useful or not, whether I could carry water, stay quiet, or simply stay out of the way. When I couldn't, they had found ways to make me feel like less. Jedediah walked to the corner cabinet, opened it, and pulled out a faded dress. He placed it on the cot near my feet. It was plain light brown, stitched by hand and clearly mended in places. "Not sure what you had," he said, "but this might do better for now." I stared at it. My old dress, still on me, was sweat-stained, torn at the hem, and filthy. I hadn't even noticed how bad it had become. I swallowed hard. "Can I wash?" "There's a basin outside. I'll bring it in." He stepped outside before I could answer. When he returned, he brought a steel wash basin filled with cold well water, a bar of soap, and a cloth. He placed them on the low table beside the cot, then walked back to the bench and sat with his back turned. "I'll stay out of the way." I didn't move for a long while. The privacy was unexpected, a gift I hadn't known I was desperate for. No gawking, no questions, just space. I reached for the basin, slowly bracing myself against the cot rail. It took a long time. My arms didn't work the way they used to. The pain from days without food and water made even lifting my elbow a chore. But I managed. I scrubbed slowly, washing my face, arms, neck, and hands. The soap smelled like pine. I didn't change the dress. Not yet. But I cleaned what I could. Jedediah didn't look once. When I finished, I said, "Done." He stood, carried the basin out, then came back and opened the door wider for air. The day was warming. I watched him as he returned to his tools. "You don't ask questions," I said. He looked up. "You want me to number?" He nodded. "All right then." That silence, strange as it was, gave me something I didn't recognize at first. Room to breathe. Later that afternoon, Jedediah brought me a short stack of folded rags and a leather scrap. He didn't explain, just set them on my lap. I looked at them, then back at him. "You sew?" he asked. "Use a needle." I nodded. He gestured to the leather strip. "Can you use your hands? You can help me stitch grips. If not, no trouble." My fingers moved across the worn leather, slow, unsure, but they remembered the motion. I began to stitch quiet, bent over the fabric like it was the only thing left that made sense. Jedediah went back to sanding a wagon yoke. No one came to the shop that day. No visitors, no neighbors, just the sound of tools, the weight of silence, and a new rhythm beginning to take hold. By evening, I had stitched half the grip. My hands hurt, my arms shook with exhaustion, but something in my chest had shifted. I wasn't just laying still anymore. And when Jedediah placed a small wooden box beside my cot before bed filled with more scraps neatly arranged, I understood what it meant. He wasn't just helping me survive. He was making space for me to stay. The third morning came cooler, with a thin haze across the window and the smell of damp wood in the air. Jedediah had risen before dawn. I heard him moving outside the door, creaking shut behind him just as the horizon started to glow. I didn't panic this time. He'd left the water within reach and an extra blanket over my legs. That small preparation told me he'd be back. I sat up slowly, hands gripping the cot's frame to shift my body into position. My arms were sore, my shoulders tight from the unfamiliar work of sewing the day before, but it was a good ache. A kind I hadn't felt in years, earned, not inflicted. The wooden box Jedediah had left was still beside me, filled now with new leather scraps and 3 fresh spools of thread. He'd organized them by size. That detail sat with me longer than expected, a small testament to his careful nature. An hour passed before I heard the horse again. Jedediah came in quietly, carrying a bucket of water in one hand and a canvas sack in the other. His boots tracked in fresh mud. Without a word, he set the sack on the table and poured water into a clean basin by the stove. "You sleep all right?" he asked, not turning toward me yet. "I think so," I said. "You hungry?" I nodded. He pulled out a small wheel of hard cheese, 2 eggs, and a square of bread that looked like it had been wrapped in cloth since yesterday. He cooked simply with a practiced rhythm: heat the skillet, crack the eggs, slice the cheese, toast the bread over the open flame. The room warmed with the scent of it. I didn't realize how much I missed the smell of food cooked with intention, not just to feed but to care. He placed a plate on the table closest to my cot and handed me a fork. "You ever cook?" he asked. I hesitated. I couldn't move much. A little. Mostly watched. He nodded. "You want I'll show you how to handle a pan with one hand?" "Not now. When you're up to it." I didn't answer, but the idea stayed in my head. Jedediah sat across the room, chewing his own meal slowly, elbows on his knees, lost in thought. His eyes weren't vacant but distant. I studied him in the quiet, the lines along his jaw, the calluses on his knuckles, the small scar on his left forearm, old but deep. He didn't speak about his past, but it was on him. It moved in the way he looked down when I asked questions. It was in the way he avoided the town. I set down my fork. "You always live alone?" I asked, my voice low. "Not always," he said, a long pause following. I waited. "My brother," he said, finally, the words a rough splintered edge. "We worked together. Barn caught fire one winter. I got out. He didn't." I nodded, not out of sympathy but understanding. "And after?" Jedediah glanced at the floor, then back at the piece of wood in his hands. "I built this place. Figured quiet would be easier." I didn't press. That answer was enough. It wasn't polished, wasn't meant for pity. It was just what happened. "What about you?" he asked. I stiffened. He saw it and didn't push. My family thought keeping me hidden was easier. And then, when my father died, they stopped pretending. They just left me. They said I'd slow them down, that they couldn't feed someone who couldn't work. My voice was a flat, dead memory. Jedediah didn't say anything for a while. The only sound was the crackle of the fire. Then he said, his voice low and steady, "If they come looking for you, I'll handle it." It wasn't a threat, wasn't even a promise. It was just something he'd already decided. I didn't thank him, but I didn't look away either. Later that afternoon, he brought in a small wooden crate and placed it near the window. Then he grabbed a piece of old wool padding, folded it into a makeshift cushion, and helped me into a sitting position by the window. It took time. He moved slowly, letting me guide how much I could bear. I gritted my teeth through the pain, but once seated upright in the sunlight, something opened in my chest. I hadn't sat by a window in years. I traced the frame with my fingertips. The glass was smudged, a small forgotten detail of a life being lived. A bee buzzed outside in the dust. The shopyard was scattered with broken wheel rims and timber lengths. Jedediah handed me a small wooden block and a strip of sandpaper. "Try this," he said. "No rush." I took it and began moving the sandpaper along the wood in small, even strokes. My fingers cramped at first. I paused, then continued. After a while, I found a rhythm. Time passed like that. Work, water, rest. By dusk, I had smoothed 2 pieces, lined them up side by side on the crate, and stared at them like they meant more than they did. Jedediah walked past once, glanced at the wood, and gave a short nod. "Good work." He didn't say more, but that was the first compliment I'd received since I was a child. That night when I laid back on the cot, arms sore, legs dull and still, I didn't feel like someone waiting to die. I felt like someone being rebuilt slowly, like one of the broken chairs Jedediah kept stacked in a corner waiting to be fixed, not tossed. There were no questions about what would happen next, no discussion of what I owed him, no fear in the silence, only the steady sound of sanding. And for the first time, I closed my eyes and didn't brace for the world to fall apart. It had been 5 days since Jedediah brought me in. Each morning came a little earlier for me now, and each one felt slightly less like waking from a nightmare. My arms still ached, my back still stiffened, but I was starting to understand the layout of the small shop, the daily rhythm of his work, and more importantly, the silence between us. It wasn't the kind of silence that judged or waited to be filled. It simply made space. That morning, I sat by the window again, already working a small block of pine he'd given me to sand. I wasn't fast, but my strokes had become more even, and I wasn't dropping the block anymore. Jedediah was outside chopping firewood. I could hear the slow, heavy thud of the axe striking, then the split of wood, then silence again. Over and over, I caught myself watching the door, waiting. I hadn't meant to start waiting for him. It just happened. He returned 20 minutes later, arms full of wood, shirt damp with sweat, jaw covered in light stubble. He glanced at the pieces I'd sanded and gave a faint nod before stacking the logs by the stove. "You're getting better with the pressure," he said. "Hands don't shake as much," I replied. "You get tired, say so." "I'm fine." He poured water into a small pot, set it over the flame. "You're not here to prove anything." He looked down. "Aren't I?" He didn't answer. I didn't expect him to. Jedediah turned to prepare our breakfast, and while the fire crackled behind him, I asked quietly, "How come nobody comes here?" He didn't look up from slicing the bread. "I keep it that way." "Why?" "Used to fix tools for the town. Stopped after a while. Didn't like how folks talked. Talked how being alone meant something was wrong with you, or was something to take advantage of." He poured water into 2 mugs. "I don't like noise. I don't like people showing up unless they knock." I nodded slowly. "You don't talk much either," he said. "Didn't have anyone to talk to for years," I replied. "Got used to thinking instead." "Good habit." He handed me the mug. I held it with both hands, letting the warmth soak through my fingers, surprised by the strength I had today. After breakfast, Jedediah returned to a chair leg he'd been shaping the night before. I watched him as I worked, his hands precise, his movements slow and patient. It made me wonder if he was always like this, or if something had changed him along the way. "You ever think about leaving here?" I asked suddenly. He looked up, caught off guard. "Leaving this town, the shop, all of it?" "Number." "Why not?" "Because I built this. It's the one thing that didn't leave me." I went quiet. That answer stayed in my mind longer than I wanted it to. Later, after midday, Jedediah stepped outside to fetch another load from the scrap pile near the back shed. I used that moment to shift myself slightly toward the crate of fabric he'd left by the stove. I was learning to move more now, using my arms to pivot, my hips to guide. My legs still hung useless, but the rest of my had started to wake up. I reached the crate, pulled out a cloth I'd seen before, a soft beige square with thin stitching on the edges. It was a woman's handkerchief, someone else's work, someone careful. I studied it for a long moment, then tucked it back in and returned to my spot before Jedediah re-entered. That evening, he brought in an unfamiliar box and placed it beside my cot. He said nothing. When I opened it, I stared. It was a seat base. 4 carved wheel mounts, a cutout section. In the middle, leather straps coiled inside and half-shaped handles. Crude but thoughtful. I looked up at him, my eyes sharp with questions. "You're building me a chair. I figure it's time." My throat tightened. Why, I asked, even though I already knew. He shrugged. "You need to move. I've got parts." "Is that all?" I whispered, a challenge in my voice. He met my eyes. Then his gaze unwavering. "Number." Silence fell again. I reached into the box, touched the handle frame. "You don't think it's too much for you?" I hesitated, then nodded. He stepped closer. "It's not charity, Cora. You belong here now. If you want to stay, this is part of it." I looked away, not because I was ashamed, but because it was the first time someone had spoken to me like I mattered in the long term, and it made me want to cry. But I didn't. Instead, I placed my hand over the wood and said, "Then I'll help finish it." He nodded. Before bed, as Jedediah stepped outside to pour out the wash water, I stared at the dim lamp on the wall and asked myself something I hadn't let myself before. Would I ever want to leave? And for the first time since I was a girl, the answer wasn't automatic. For the first time, it was a quiet, careful no. And when Jedediah returned and asked if I was warm enough, and I nodded, and he said all right before sitting down to finish sanding the armrest of the wheelchair, something between us shifted. Not with words, not with a touch, but with a sense that we had both decided to stay. The shop felt different after that night. Not louder, not fuller, just more alive. Jedediah continued working on the wheelchair by lantern light. He didn't rush the job, and he didn't explain every part of it. He just showed me what he was doing. And I now, pulling my weight in small but steady ways, stitched leather padding for the armrests, smoothed the slats that would hold my back upright, and began to see the shape of something I never thought would exist for me. Mobility. It wasn't about comfort. It was about control. By the third morning since he'd begun building the chair, the wheels were ready to be mounted. Jedediah had repurposed 2 iron-rimmed cartwheels, sanded, oiled, and bolted to a new axle system he'd carved himself. He brought the frame over to my cot and said nothing, just lowered it down so I could run my fingers over the base. I didn't smile, not outwardly, but something in my posture changed. "How soon till it's finished?" I asked, my voice a little breathless. "Couple more days." "Will it roll on dirt? Good enough to get you out past the door?" "Might rattle a bit." "I can live with that." Jedediah gave a short nod and returned to the bench. That day, for the first time since my arrival, he left me alone for a stretch. Just after lunch, he saddled up and said, "Need to go into town." "You're right here." I blinked. "You're leaving me?" He shrugged. "Just for a while. I'll bolt the door. You'll be safe." I swallowed, unsure why the thought made me nervous. What if someone comes? Who? That question sat heavy for a moment. I had no answer. He added, "Nobody comes out this way. If they do, don't open the door, not even for knocking." I gave a small nod. Before leaving, he moved the water basin closer, put a tin cup beside me, and adjusted the blanket around my legs. I said nothing, but my eyes followed him all the way out. When the door finally clicked shut behind him, the silence was sharp. I sat still for a long time, listening. Nothing came. No voices, no wagons, just wind rattling the boards outside and the distant creak of the weather vane on the roof. I looked at the nearly finished wheelchair, then at my hands. I reached for the leather straps, slid them in my lap, and began threading the buckles slowly. It wasn't work I was used to, but my fingers were stronger now. I wanted him to see it when he came back. I didn't know why, but I wanted him to be proud. Jedediah returned 2 hours later. His coat was dusted in road grit, and his hands smelled faintly of gun oil. He carried 2 small parcels under one arm, cloth-wrapped and tied with string. I watched as he walked in, set the packages on the table, and checked the lock on the door before pulling off his gloves. "Everything all right?" he asked. "No trouble," I said. He glanced at the wheelchair frame. The leather straps I'd prepared were sitting neatly in a pile, buckled and trimmed. "You did these?" "I did." "Clean work." Something flickered between us, a brief, wordless moment, where I felt the air pull just slightly between my chest and his. He untied the first parcel. Inside was a small tin of salve, homemade, thick, yellowish. He placed it on the table near me and said, "For your hands, from the general store widow." Said it helped with burns, scarring, and rough skin. I looked down at my knuckles, raw from the sandpaper. "I'll use it later." He didn't press. The second parcel held something softer. 2 long-sleeve shirts and a folded skirt, simple but new. I stared at them for a beat, longer than I meant to. "You didn't have to. They were cheap," he cut in. "You're cold in the mornings." I looked at him. His face didn't change. He went to the stove to stoke the fire, but I caught the way his shoulders sat a little tighter than usual. "Jedediah." He paused. "You think I'm a charity case?" He turned to face me. "Number. Then why help?" "Because when I see something broken, I fix it." I stared at him, a sudden fire in my eyes. "I'm not a chair," I said, my voice sharp with a sudden raw anger. "I know." He walked back to the bench, but he didn't pick up a tool. I shifted on the cot, uncertain of the weight in my chest. It wasn't pain. Not anymore. It was something else. Something that came from being treated like I mattered, from being seen, not just helped. After dinner, as he sat by the stove, sharpening a carving blade, I asked, "You ever had someone live here with you before?" "Number. Not even for a little while. Not since my brother." What would he think of me? Jedediah didn't answer right away. He wiped the blade clean and set it down. "He'd say you were tough," he said. "Stubborn too, like me." "I'm not tough." "You are," he said quietly. "You just forgot." We didn't say much after that. The fire burned low, and outside the wind started to rise. That night, after he blew out the lamp, Jedediah paused near my cot. "You warm enough?" "Yeah." He hesitated. "Chair should be ready soon." "I know." His voice was softer now. "I want you to try it first out back. Just me and you. No rush." I nodded. Before he stepped away, I reached out, touched his wrist lightly, just for a second. My hand was shaking, but I didn't pull back right away. "Thanks," I said. "For all of it." Jedediah looked down at my hand, then up at me. "You're not here because I felt sorry for you," he said. "You're here because I want you here." And for the first time, something cracked through the part of me that had always been braced to be discarded. Not saved, but kept. But that was the first compliment I'd received since I was a child. That night, when I laid back on the cot, arms sore, legs dull and still, I didn't feel like someone waiting to die. I felt like someone being rebuilt, slowly, like one of the broken chairs Jedediah kept stacked in a corner, waiting to be fixed, not tossed. There were no questions about what would happen next. No discussion of what I owed him, no fear in the silence, only the steady sound of sanding. And for the first time, I closed my eyes and didn't brace for the world to fall apart. Jedediah started the morning by sliding the finished wheelchair frame across the floor, with both hands, slow and careful, until it stopped beside my cot. The wheels were oiled, the leather seat had been stitched into place, the armrests were sanded smooth, and a footrest had been bolted near the bottom, wide enough to cradle both my legs. I stared at it, my breath caught somewhere between shock and dread. It looked real now, not an idea, not a conversation. It was here, waiting. I swallowed hard, then looked up at Jedediah. "You think I can?" He nodded once. "I'll help." He crouched beside my cot, unhurried. "I'll lift from your back and hips. You guide with your arms. We take it slow." I sat up, breath shallow, gripping the cot's frame. My hands trembled. "Wait," I said. I need a second." Jedediah didn't move. He rested his arm along the edge of the cot and waited. My mind raced. What if I fell? What if my body folded wrong? What if I embarrassed myself in front of the only man who treated me like I wasn't a burden? "Don't rush it," Jedediah said quietly. "But don't talk yourself out of trying." I looked at him, then nodded. "Okay," I whispered. He slid one arm behind my back, the other under my thighs. My muscles clenched as he lifted, slow and steady, cradling my weight, as if he'd memorized every point of pressure. I winced when my hip shifted, but didn't cry out. I gripped his shoulder with one hand until he gently eased me down into the leather seat. The frame creaked slightly beneath me. Jedediah let go, gradually keeping one hand near my shoulder in case I tilted. I sat upright, both feet resting loosely on the wooden footrest. For a full 10 seconds, I didn't move. Just breathed. "It doesn't hurt," I said, surprised. "No," he replied. "Built it not to." My hands rested on the armrests. I looked around the room from this new height. No longer on the floor, no longer confined to a cot. Everything looked different. The shelves were closer. The stove was reachable. I looked down at the wheels, the narrow handles, then back at Jedediah. "Out back when you're ready." We took the rear door. Jedediah opened it wide, wheeled me down the sloped ramp he'd built earlier that week, and guided me slowly into the backyard. The ground was packed dirt, a little uneven but solid. There were scraps, a few potted herbs, and a shed leaning slightly to one side. The sun was still low, not too harsh yet. Wind moved gently across the open space. Jedediah stepped back, rested his hands on his hips. "Try it." I stared at the wheels. My palms were slick. I wiped them on my dress, then placed them on the outer rims and pushed slowly, uneven at first. Then again the chair rolled. Not fast, not far, but it moved. I laughed, a sudden sharp sound, surprised at myself. I did it again, turning slightly to the left, then straight. The sensation was strange, but it wasn't fear. It was motion control independence. Jedediah didn't smile, but he watched me with something different in his eyes. Something soft, steady. I looked at him. I thought it'd feel worse, like being tied to something. He stepped beside me. You're not tied to anything, it's yours, go where you want. I paused. Even if that means away from here. His jaw worked. Then he said, if that's what you want. I shook my head. It's not, he nodded. For the next hour I practiced turns, starts, stops. Jedediah cleared rocks from the path, showed me how to angle the wheels over shallow ruts. When I grew tired, he walked behind and pushed me in quiet circles, never speaking unless I asked something. By the time we went back inside, my arms were shaking with effort. That night I sat at the table with him for the first time. No cot, no crate. He made stew, simple root vegetables and dried beef, and poured it into 2 clay bowls. He sat across from me without comment, eating slowly, occasionally glancing up to check my grip on the spoon. I was slower than him, sloppier, but I didn't spill anything. Halfway through the meal, I said I used to sit at a table like this. Once, my father let me. Back before he got too proud. When I was small enough, he'd carry me to the table, set me down beside my brothers. Jedediah sipped his stew. Then he said I needed to eat alone because I couldn't serve myself. Said I was distracting. Weak. Jedediah didn't reply, but he didn't look away. I didn't realize how much I missed sitting eye level with someone. He nodded. You deserve that. Later, while he cleaned the bowls, I sat near the workbench, adjusting the buckles on the side of my chair. My hands moved steadily now, the tremor less obvious. I've been thinking, I said. Jedediah looked up. If I'm going to stay, I want to help more. Learn things. Real things with tools. He dried his hands. You want to build? I want to try. He nodded slowly. I'll teach you. I watched him, my voice quieter now. Why are you doing all this for me? His eyes didn't flinch. Because I want you here. You said that already. I meant it. Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable. And then for the first time he stepped close. Not with purpose. Not with a chore in hand. Just close. His hand hovered briefly near my cheek, unsure, then rested lightly against my jaw. My breath caught not from fear but from the unfamiliar warmth of it. He leaned down slowly, not rushing. When his lips touched mine, it wasn't firm or rehearsed. It was just real. My hand touched his arm gently. The kiss stayed for a second, then he pulled back. When we parted, I didn't look away. I whispered I thought men like you didn't exist. Jedediah said I thought the same about women like you. We stood. I sat. Like that for a moment longer. 2 people not saved, not broken, just choosing each other quietly, steadily. And for the first time since my parents left me in the dust, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone's pity. I felt wanted. The next morning came with a quiet calm, the kind that didn't announce itself with light or wind, but settled into the corners of the room. I lay awake before Jedediah stirred. My body was still sore from the chair practice the day before, but it wasn't the kind of soreness I dreaded. It felt earned, like something real had shifted inside and out. Jedediah was still asleep in his chair by the stove, arms crossed, head slumped. His face, normally unreadable, looked softer in sleep. I studied him in the half-light, unsure of what to call the feeling growing in my chest. It wasn't gratitude anymore. It had passed that line days ago. When he woke, I was already at the table, practicing how to steer the chair without jerking left. I'd figured out a trick with my fingers, grip tight on one side, ease on the other. Jedediah watched me in silence for a moment before getting up and lighting the stove. Want eggs or corn mush? He asked. Both. He gave a small grunt approving and began cracking eggs. We worked side by side most of that morning. I learned how to hold a handsaw steady, how to mark the edge of a board with charcoal, how to loop a leather strap tight around a raw handle. Jedediah didn't explain things twice. He didn't coddle. When I got something wrong, he didn't sigh. He just showed me again. I watched every movement, determined to learn it the way he did. By midday, I'd cut 3 usable slats and fitted them into a crate frame. My hands were red and blistering. You need a break, Jedediah said. I need gloves, I replied. He chuckled, a low sound that almost didn't register. I'll cut some from scrap hide later, he said. You earned them. I rolled my eyes. So I'm finally useful now. Jedediah leaned on the bench. You've been useful since the first day you threaded that leather grip. I didn't answer, but my face turned away, hiding something that wanted to show. Later, while I washed my hands in the cold basin, I caught my reflection in the metal. My cheeks looked fuller. My shoulders weren't as sunken. Even the stiffness in my voice had softened these past days. I didn't recognize the woman staring back, and I didn't hate it. We ate dinner on the porch that evening. Jedediah had dragged out 2 chairs, one wooden, the other my own, with a short plank wedged under the left wheel to stop it from rolling downhill. We sat quietly watching the dust roll down from the hills. A hawk circled above. Far off, a coyote barked once and stopped. Jedediah leaned back. You still think about them? The ones who left you? I nodded once. Sometimes I dream they come back. Not to say sorry, just to take me again. Jedediah's jaw moved tight. They won't come back, he said. But if they do, they won't touch you. I didn't doubt him. That was new too. I turned my head toward him. Why haven't you gone into town lately? He took his time answering. Don't want to leave you alone again. I can handle myself. He looked at me, then at the ground. I know, but I'm worried. I nodded. You don't trust people, do you? Not most. Is that about your brother? He hesitated, then said partly. He died in a fire. I should have stopped. Folks in town knew the roof was cracked. I told him. They didn't fix it. When it collapsed, he was inside. I'm sorry. Me too. We sat in silence after that. The sky turned dark blue, stars bleeding in slowly. Then I reached across, placed my hand on his knee. Jedediah looked down at it, then up at my face. I didn't flinch this time. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Jedediah nodded once. And then, with the same quiet purpose he always carried, he leaned in and kissed me again, slower this time, deeper. I didn't hesitate. My hand went to his collar, gripping gently. The warmth between us didn't come from surprise anymore. When we pulled back, neither spoke for a moment. Jedediah's voice was low. You still think I don't exist? I smiled, small and certain. I think I do now. That night, we didn't return to separate corners of the shop. Jedediah placed a mattress near the stove, low, simple, made of wool and canvas, and set it beside the cot. He didn't ask. He just built it. I watched him, my heart beating steady. I wheeled closer, placed my hand on his. He met my eyes. I want to stay close tonight, I said. Not for safety. For me. He didn't answer with words. He just took my hand and helped me settle beside him, slow and careful, the way he did everything, with respect, not urgency. And when I laid my head against his shoulder, he rested his cheek against my hair. There was no ceremony, no promises spoken, but the space between us was gone. Jedediah woke before the sun, like always, but this time he didn't move right away. I lay against him, breathing steady, my hand resting loosely over his chest. My hair was spread across his shoulder, my legs curled awkwardly beside me. I still hadn't figured out how to sleep comfortably on my side, but I was trying. And I hadn't asked for help. I didn't need to. He watched me for a long while before quietly sliding out from under the blanket. He didn't want to wake me. Not yet. I needed the rest. My arms had trembled from overwork the day before, and he'd noticed the red patch forming on my left palm where a wheel rim had rubbed too raw. He stoked the stove silently, then stepped out back, letting the door close with barely a click. The air was cold. His boots left prints in the morning dust. He gathered what little firewood was left, made a note in his mind. We'd need more soon. We were running low on flour too, and he was almost out of stitching needles. He'd have to go into town before the week was out. When he stepped back inside, I was awake, upright in my chair, already dressed, hair tied back sloppily but neatly enough. My hands gripped the rims of the wheels with purpose. You didn't wake me, I said. You looked peaceful. I nodded, brushing loose strands behind my ear. Didn't sleep through the night, but it was better than before. You sore? A little. Palms. He reached for the tin of salve, opened it, and knelt beside my chair. I didn't flinch when he took my hand. He rubbed the ointment in gently, not speaking. When he finished, I didn't pull my hand away. I want to try something, I said. Jedediah tilted his head. What is it? Outside. The hill behind the shed. I want to see if I can get to the top. He looked toward the back window. The hill wasn't steep, but the ground was loose, a treacherous mix of gravel, dry grass, and soft dirt near the ridge. It wasn't the kind of terrain made for wheels, but it wasn't impossible either. You're sure? Yes. He studied my face. My voice was calm, clear. Then let's go. We left after breakfast. Jedediah packed a canteen, tied it to the back of my chair, and followed behind me in silence. I pushed myself forward, steadily pacing my arms, breathing through the effort. My wheels snagged on stones more than once, and each time I stopped, adjusted, and moved again. Not once did I ask for help. At the halfway point, my shoulders were shaking. You want to stop? Jedediah asked. Number. He didn't argue, didn't offer help. He just walked beside me in case I tipped. But I didn't. I reached the top 20 minutes later. From up there, the land stretched wide. Brown hills rolling into a low blue distance. Scattered trees like scars on the horizon. A ribbon of creek just barely visible far off. Jedediah stood beside me, arms crossed, face unreadable. I breathed hard, my chest rising and falling. My hair clung to my neck with sweat. I didn't think I could, I said. I did. I turned to him. Why? Because you keep showing me you can. He didn't reach out, didn't touch me. He just stood beside me like I was his equal. Like I wasn't broken. Like I never had been. We stayed there a while. Then I broke the silence. When you came back with those parcels that day, the food, the shirts, the salve, I saw your holster was gone. Jedediah's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't answer. I continued. Did you sell your gun? He exhaled slowly. Pawned it. Why? I needed coin fast. Thought maybe the chair, parts, the salve, the clothes. They mattered more. I blinked. My chest tightened with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. What if someone came after me? My family. I'd still protect you, he said. Gun or not, I don't want you to be defenseless because of me. You're not a burden. I turned to face him fully. I know, but I'm still yours to look after now. Same way I look out for you. He paused, then gave the faintest nod. That's fair. Back at the shop, I spent the afternoon sorting nails and fitting wooden pegs for a repair job Jedediah had started an old rocking chair frame. Jedediah moved slower that day, watching me more often than usual, his mind elsewhere. By sundown, we sat together on the porch again, but this time there was a different tension between us. Not the old fear, something closer to the edge of decision. I broke it. I know what people in town will say if they find out we share a bed. Jedediah looked at me. I don't care what they say. I don't either. I just wanted to be clear. He set his mug down. What are you saying? I met his eyes. I want this. Not just the help. Not just the space. You. Jedediah didn't speak. He stood up, stepped in front of me, and lowered to one knee. I've got no ring, he said. No preacher. Not much of a name that matters. I've got this place. These hands. My word. I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. I want to marry you, he said. If you'll have me. My throat caught. My hand reached out, touched his chest. You're all I want, I whispered. He leaned forward, kissed me again, this time longer, with my fingers clutching his collar, pulling him in. The kiss wasn't rushed, wasn't desperate. It was the kind that stayed quiet but said everything. That night, when he carried me to the mattress near the stove, I didn't resist. And this time we didn't sleep in fear of losing something. We slept like people who had finally found home. 3 weeks had passed since Jedediah asked me to marry him. The mornings had turned cooler, touched with the kind of breeze that signaled autumn wasn't far off. Leaves from the scrub trees behind the shed had started to curl yellow, and I had begun to move through the shop with such ease in my chair that it barely drew notice anymore. I stitched grips for wagon tools. I sorted lumber by width and dryness. I swept the floor each night with a wide push broom strapped to the front of my chair, a method I came up with myself. Jedediah didn't call me clever out loud, but I saw it in his face every time he watched me work. The cot by the wall was gone, now folded up and stored in the loft. My place was beside Jedediah's, not because I needed protection or warmth, but because I wanted it. We hadn't made any announcements. No town preacher, no paperwork, but we called each other husband and wife now. It was quiet, natural, a new rhythm. That morning, Jedediah was preparing for a supply trip into town. He hadn't gone alone since bringing me home, but now I was strong enough to stay behind a few hours. I insisted. You need flour metal dowels and new lamp oil, I said, reading from the list I'd written. My handwriting had grown steadier. And thread, he added. You're running low. And soap. He gave me a look. Are you saying I smell? I'm saying the stove does. He smiled. It was a small thing, but it stayed longer than usual. As he saddled up, he looked back at me in the doorway. You sure you'll be all right? I've got tools, I said. And a hammer. He nodded and mounted his horse. Don't let that merchant overcharge you again, I called after him. He won't. I watched him disappear down the road, then wheeled myself back inside. It was strange how quiet the place felt without him now. Not empty, just waiting. I worked through the morning, finishing a leather sheath for a draw knife, patching one of Jedediah's worn shirts, boiling water for the wash. The salve still helped my palms. The gloves he'd made me fit perfectly. Midday came. Then early afternoon, and then came the knock. 2 sharp taps on the front door. I froze. No one ever knocked. I moved slowly toward the door, keeping my chair quiet, my body tense. I didn't open it, just called out, my voice clear. Who is it? A man's voice, gruff, unfamiliar. Looking for Jedediah Thorne. Heard he's got a woman here. Shouldn't be his. My blood turned to ice. I backed my chair slightly from the door, my heart pounding, now my hands slick on the rims. Don't know who told you that, I said. Her folks are in town, the voice said. The marshal said she's got a condition. Ain't fit for living out here alone. I steadied my breath. She's not alone. You got no right playing wife when you can't even walk. I stared at the door. My pulse steadied. I reached to my side and gripped the small claw hammer I'd tucked under the seat. I walked this land longer than you, I said, my voice a low, dangerous growl. I built this shop's shelves. I carved that window frame. I stitched the grips on Jedediah's hammer. And if you're still standing there when he gets back, you'll learn what else I'm capable of. There was silence then, footsteps fading. I didn't move for a while, just sat still, my heart steady now. Jedediah returned an hour later, his cart half full. Before he even dismounted, I wheeled outside to meet him. There was a man, I said. His face darkened. What did he want? Claimed to be sent by my family. Said I don't belong here. Jedediah's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. I handled it, I added. You all right? I nodded. Didn't even need the hammer. He stepped down, walked to me, and took my hand in his. You're not going anywhere. I wasn't planning to. That night we sat by the stove, quiet again. He reached into one of the parcels and pulled out a thin silver band. It's not much, he said, but it's yours. I stared at the ring, then looked up at him. I don't need proof. I do. He slid it onto my finger. It fit. I didn't cry, but my hand shook slightly as I brought it to my chest. I want to start building something new, he said. Like what? A room out back. Bigger windows, more light. For what? For our child, he said softly. My eyes met his. I haven't told you yet. You didn't have to. I laughed, then covered my mouth, a sound of pure joy. We didn't say anything else for a while. The stove crackled softly. Outside, the wind picked up. It was colder now. The season was changing, but inside the shop everything was steady. I rested my head on Jedediah's shoulder. I never thought I'd end up loved. You didn't end up here, he said. You earned it. And that was the truth. In a place where people left each other behind, we had stayed. In a town that turned its back on both of us, we had built something that worked. Slow, quiet, imperfect, but strong. And we weren't alone anymore. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.